Hello, this is Karen Anderson, founder of Supporting Success for Children with Hearing Loss. And I am excited to talk to you about changes that we've made to the online version of the Listening Inventory for Education Revised. Back in 1998, Joe Smaldino and I came up with a listening inventory for education. They were paper checklists, and they were used pretty widely throughout the field of deaf education. But then we felt they needed to be revised, and so we invited Carrie Spangler, an educational audiologist, to our team and added some new features and then made it online. We set up a LifeR website that a lot of you have probably been using with your students. If you're new to the LifeR, I'd like to give you a little tour. If you're a longtime user, I want to point out the differences in how to get up and running quickly with the new LifeR site. So let's get going. So once you go to lifr.successforkidswithhearingloss.com, this is what pops up. And I wanted to point out to you that lower on the page, it makes it clear that the LifeR has 4 tools. There's the Before Life, which is a get set, where we ask the student to be the expert about where he sits and what's going on in his classroom. There's the student appraisal that has 15 questions that are asked of the student. And then there's the Afterlife that is specific to getting at those self-advocacy strategies that he uses to cope with challenging listening situations encountered in school. And then there's also a 2-page teacher appraisal. So those 4 things make up the suite of LifeR assessments. So once you sign in, or once you get onto the site, you will notice that there is the ability to log in or register. If you've never used the LifeR before, please go ahead and register. You just need to put in your password and your email, and you're registered. If you've used the LifeR, even if it was 10 years ago, you're already registered. So don't register again. Unless you have a new email and want to use that different email. But you can go ahead and click on login, and it will give you the option of a one-time password, an OTP. Go ahead and click on that, and it will send you a 4-digit code to your email address. And if you don't receive that code within 30 seconds, it will send one from a different system. What we found is that there's plenty of firewalls and different emails. So we needed to make sure that there were 2 options for sending off the security codes. So once you're all logged into the system, you will see your name up in the upper right-hand corner, and you're going to keep going back to this and going back to the dashboard. So here is the dashboard in a nutshell, and we'll go over each of these things. One of the exciting things, I think, is under student information. And you need to do this for all of the kids. You can't just go ahead and do one of the checklists. You need to go in and provide demographic information. But you can see, if you've used the LifeR before, all of your student data is here. We never collect names. So everything's under the student ID, but it also comes with a date, which should help if you didn't write down the ID. So you can go back and generate the data again, print out the information again, but I'm going to show you here. You need to add let's go ahead and add Tommy Tester. Okay, you need to go ahead and add that student's first and last name again. The school, let's say Whoville, and the teacher's name. And then you can go ahead and submit that. You always have to click here. I understand that this information might be used for research, because we still have a lot to learn about how hearing loss impacts function in the classroom. Again, we never save the student's first and last name. If you're entering a new student and you've never seen this form before, you're going to also add gender, mode of communication, because if we have students who are, let's say, simultaneous communication, total communication users, that's going to make a difference. If they're spoken language, if they use ASL or sign, we still wonder if, gosh, can they still hear and can they still understand what the teacher is saying? You wouldn't say hear and understand if they're using ASL, but you can always adapt it. How well do you understand what the teacher is saying? And then what kind of strategies do you use? If they use hearing devices, and if so, what's the consistency? We know that a child who uses their hearing devices 90% or more of the time are going to be more cued into listening situations and more able to cope than those that wear their hearing aids or hearing devices inconsistently. And so we asked personal hearing device, hearing aids separate from their classroom hearing assistance technology. And if it's just one ear or both ears, same thing with cochlear implant, bone anchored devices, and type of classroom hearing technology. And then down here, the degree of loss, if the child has essentially the same range of hearing in both ears, you would click here. If they have a unilateral loss or high frequency loss. We also added auditory processing disorder. They have a conductive hearing loss, meaning frequent ear infections. There's that choice as well. So you would specify a degree of loss, and you need to click this every time, like I said, so that you're recognizing that, yes, this information might be used for research. And again, not kid names ever. You're going to submit it. Okay, so that was for Mr. 3727. So I'm writing that down, 3727. Okay, I'm going to go back up here. Now that I have the demographic information filled out and I've chosen that student, let's look at the different things that he had checked. So again, I'm looking back at this particular student because, no, let's see, I need to choose the student ID. I wanted to choose 3727. Okay. And the before life questions, again, it's putting that child in the seat of being the expert in the classroom about things going on. Where does he sit, for example? And, what are the noises that he hears? So there's, I believe, 6 of those questions. All right. And then the student appraisal has 15 questions, and the child has to choose just one of these. He can't choose 2. He has to choose one. And we need to keep in mind that for any checklist, children do not have the maturity to provide valid responses for this kind of decision making until they're at least 8 years old. And they have to have the maturity of that 8-year-old. If you're trying to do this with a kindergartner or first grader, we cannot assume that the responses are going to be valid. If you use a forced choice of like only 3 items, you can start to get at some of this information, but I would only do it very informally, and I wouldn't show it in this format at all. So the student is going to go through and answer these questions. And I challenge you and really encourage you to do this as a discussion with the student. Discuss with them, the teacher is talking in front of the class. That means like when Mrs. Seuss is up there and you're sitting in your seat and everybody's listening to her, how hard or how well can you hear and understand what she is saying? So make it a conversation, make it more of an interview. Don't just fill out the form. So they go through. Now, the first 10 questions relate specifically to listening in the classroom setting, listening to the teacher. And then the other 5 are more like group listening in small group, listening in an assembly, listening to announcements, that sort of thing. So you get the kind of the full gamut of the classroom listening challenges. All right, that's the life student appraisal. Okay, I'm going to go back to the dashboard. So then we're going to do the afterlife. Now, we created this one, because it's one thing to see, have a child rate how challenging it is, but don't we really know what strategies they use? Well, sure, you can go in and you could observe for 15 minutes or a half an hour or whatever, but that you probably aren't going to see every strategy that the child knows how to use in that period of time. So let's see what they report. Now, sometimes you're going to get really good, honest reporters, and other times you're going to get kids who might not be thrilled with your service, and they're just like, nope, nothing's wrong. Nope, everything's extremely easy. So you need to know your student well enough to be able to say, yeah, I observed you and I saw this. Okay. The other thing is that for the 8 afterlife questions, the students can select more than one item, but they have to do it regularly. It's not just, oh yeah, I did that once. No, this needs to be kind of, what are your fallback strategies when this happens? And we have, in these choices, we have positive, negative, and neutral kinds of strategies. So like, do nothing and hope that I will figure it out later on, that would be a negative strategy. Using some kind of a signal, that would be a positive strategy. Looking around, kind of neutral, it's very passive. So there's a gamut here. They're not all positive strategies. So it sets the child up to maybe choose one that is more realistic. And again, the best way to do this is from a discussion standpoint. So again, what do you do if it's too noisy in your classroom, making it hard for you to understand what your teacher says? If you haven't looked at all of the questions in the before life, the student appraisal, and the afterlife, please take the time and do so you have a full understanding of the kinds of things that the students will be responding to. Okay, now for the cool part. You can generate reports with this data you entered for your students. So let's first look at the summary of challenges. Okay, here's the title, Summary of Listening Challenges, and you can see the demographic information you entered, the hearing device, information, and then some information about the student. And we do include the URL. So if you print out a PDF, the URL will be there if you want to go back and see what the child, go back into the system. You can do that. I want to discourage you from just grabbing the URL and sending it to somebody via email. This does include the student's first and last name. And unless you have encryption or something, please think about the confidentiality issues. We always need to take that into account. So the summary of school listening challenges is a report of just those items where the student said, sometimes difficult, that's a 1-star, mostly difficult, that's a 2-star, and always difficult, so that's a 3-star. So you can really prioritize what are the biggest challenges for the child, and what will that help you with? The discussions about, gosh, then what can we do? What accommodations are needed? What strategies do we need to teach with the student? And what's most important to work on first? So that is our summary of school listening challenges. And you can ask that it be reported to your email. And if it doesn't get through the first time, it'll go through that different system and try and send the report to you. If you were able to get the password, you should be able to get the email. Or you can just print this page. I would suggest doing it as a PDF and put it in the child's e-folder or put it in a paper folder. So that is the report, that is Summary of School Listening Challenges. What's the next one? It is the report to generate accommodation suggestions. Again, we have the demographic information, but for this, considering it's going to talk about accommodations, so you're probably going to be more likely to be discussing this and sharing it with a teacher. So we put in the information about this particular hearing loss based on the handouts called Relationship of Hearing Loss and Listening Difficulties. And So that's just kind of general information, and we know that there are kids that respond really well with, depending on their, that we're surprised they do so well, and children who do worse than we would expect. But this is just general information. All right. And then the accommodations are crosswalked only for those items that the child responded to as sometimes difficult, mostly difficult, and always difficult. So it's not like you're giving this generic, here, Mrs. Seuss, here's the accommodations kids with hearing loss need. No, these are tailored. These are tailored to this student's specific responses. So you could, include some of these in the reports, or clip, one and send reminders via email, that sort of thing. And again, you can go ahead and send it to yourself by email or print the page only. Let's look at our final report, and that is the self-advocacy suggestions. And the interesting thing about this is that these are the before life answers. So this is what the students is saying is going on in his classroom. And then it lists each of the afterlife questions. And then in this case, the child didn't select any positive self-advocacy strategies. They selected these two negative strategies. And so you have these strategies as potentials for your planning, for IEP goals or planning for intervention. And it goes through that with each of the various questions. So question number 3, he actually did have a positive self-advocacy strategy, but he had 2 negative ones, that kind of thing. And for each of these questions, there's the opportunity to ask, do you see the student using, for example, if we were down here, Mrs. Seuss, do you see him doing this? When he can't see that, do you see him doing this strategy? Yes or no? And encourage her input. The validity of children's responses on a checklist are always better, or considered more valid, if we can verify with an adult that is with that student all the time, or a lot of the time. So that's what we're trying to do here. We're checking validity. Is she seeing that he's doing these things? And then this is kind of a get set for, gosh, what do you do that's different than the speech language pathologist or the LD teacher? Because you can say, okay, he didn't use any positive strategies, but these are the kind of things that we could work on with him. And so start to develop that aha with that teacher that, oh, yeah, this would be really helpful for him. And, oh, yeah, you can teach that? Okay, so you can print that out as well. If you've ever used the paper form of the student appraisal with those 15 questions, you might remember that if you add them all together, there's a maximum score of 100, or you can even report that Tommy Tester scored 54% on the Life R out of 100% possible. The thing to know is that research has shown, based on almost 200 secondary students with typical hearing, that their average scores were 72%. Because let's face it, there's listening challenges in every classroom with background noise and distance. So 72% is our comparison to peer expectations or peer performance. I think that it is very valid to use the Listening Inventory for Education Revised as a functional assessment to look at and try to answer the question, is there an adverse educational impact based on that student's hearing ability when learning in the classroom? We're getting that data. but just we need to remember that 72% is the expectation. And we have stars, cochlear implant users, long time hearing aid users, where they don't use many strategies because they hear it for the first time. So we always have to take that into account. 72% in the 70s is a really good response. Okay, and then you can download the instruction manual and download the teacher life, and the other life are appraisals that are electronic versions of this form. So if you wanted to send an electronic version of the Life R teacher appraisal, you could do that. This goes directly to our Teacher Tools Takeout site. And there are 2 pages to the teacher appraisal. The first one is teacher appraisal of listening difficulty. And this really zooms in on their attention and their class participation. So those are the things that are most observable by teachers and are the best litmus test for the impact of listening with a hearing loss in a classroom. And then the second page takes more thinking by teachers, and it asks about self-advocacy and instructional access. And even just filling out this particular page starts to create the idea of like, oh yeah, there are some challenges here, and there are some things that student can do. So the Life R site and being able to do this with your students is our gift to you. There's no charge, there's no fee at this point for teachers or anybody, parents, to log in and work with their children or their students to get this information that should be very helpful in team meetings and in planning for intervention for our students who are deaf or hard of hearing. So thank you for letting me take you on a tour of the Life R. I hope that you will be able to use it and that your students will benefit. So bye now from Supporting Success.